Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Coming up on Bridge City News. As Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues, more Ukrainians flee to neighboring countries. Plus, Alberta's premier says he wants to block municipal masking bylaws. We hear from our legislative reporter. And an Alberta judge denies bail for a man arrested during the Acute border blockade.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. The United Nations estimates that more than 500,000 people have already fled Ukraine this week as the Russian invasion continues. Braving frigid temperatures and snow, thousands of Ukrainian refugees arrived at Ukraine's border with Poland and Romania, many of them women carrying children, assisting elderly relatives, and comforting frightened pets. As they stepped into Romania, leaving their home country behind, emotions were high.
My husband, my home, my dog, my cats, my life.
7 days into the war, Ukrainian men of fighting age are banned from leaving the country. Others are still seeking to join the evacuation, crowding Kyiv's train stations. Residents of the capital city are struggling to cope in a city transformed by Russian attacks. Subway stations have been turned into bomb shelters, while one maternity ward has moved its patients into a basement. Meanwhile, Pope Francis has publicly thanked Poland for its role in helping refugees from the war in Ukraine, praising the country's people for, quote, opening your borders, your hearts, the doors of your homes. And Poland's foreign minister says the Russian invasion of Ukraine has violated international human rights laws.
The horror that was imposed on my country's neighbor has already caused deaths and suffering, including among civilians, and constitutes the most deplorable degree of violations of international human rights law. It also openly confirms our worst fears that Russia holds human rights in complete disregard.
Ash Wednesday is a day celebrated by many in the Catholic community. Pope Francis declared it as a day of fasting and prayer for peace in Ukraine as the war with Russia rages on for a seventh day. As Micah Quinn explains, schools here in Lethbridge are celebrating the day by wearing blue and yellow in support of Ukraine.
This is an opportunity for us here at Our Lady of the Assumption and Holy Spirit Schools as an entire division to respond to the call of our Holy Father.
Megan Calder, the principal for the Our Lady of Assumption School here in Lethbridge, says the school celebrated Ash Wednesday after Pope Francis made a call to action against the war that Russia has been waging against Ukraine.
And to recognize this day not only as being Ash Wednesday, which is already a day of fasting and prayer, almsgiving for us as we begin our Lenten journey, but really an opportunity for us to focus on peace for all, peace in the Ukraine individually, and an opportunity for us to really recognize those prayers and focus those prayers through a physical examination, I guess, of that by wearing the blue and yellow and really being able to focus in that prayer.
Ash Wednesday marks the beginning of Lent for Catholics and Christians.
And Lent is a 40-day season of prayer and fasting, just kind of working towards Easter. On Ash Wednesday in particular, it's a time of just almost mourning and just reflection on just the sin and death and evil in the world and in our hearts. One of the things that we'll do on Ash Wednesday is we'll mark ourselves on our foreheads with ash in the shape of a cross. And this is just to remind us of our mortality and our frailty in this life.
Aaron Skredding, the Director of Religious Studies for the Holy Spirit Roman Catholic School Division, says the war in Ukraine holds a special connection to Ash Wednesday.
The time that we have right now for the people in the Ukraine, obviously people there will be drawing very close to God as well, and so we would unite ourselves with them in prayer, reminding ourselves that we're in God's hands.
Via Church will be hosting an Ash Wednesday service at 7 p.m. on Wednesday night. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The United Nations General Assembly has voted 141 to 5 with 35 abstentions to demand an immediate halt to Moscow's war on Ukraine and the withdrawal of all Russian troops. Russia got support from Belarus, Syria, North Korea, and Eritrea in an indication of the international isolation that President Vladimir Putin faces. Before the vote, Ukraine's UN ambassador told diplomats that Russian forces are not only trying to kill Ukrainians, but to deprive Ukraine of the right to exist. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, meanwhile, says he thinks Vladimir Putin is surprised by the strength and unity of Western sanctions in retaliation for his invasion of Ukraine.
These are things that I think has definitely taken aback the Russian system because we are so united in standing up not just for Ukraine, but for the principles of democracy that matter so much. The thing that has really had an impact that I think we can all conclude surprised Vladimir Putin was that we are so united. We are so firm. I mean, for countries like Canada and the UK to be forward-leaning on pushing on sanctions, Putin probably expected. For Germany to cancel Nord Stream, to talk about shipping weapons to Ukraine, these are things that I think has definitely taken aback the Russian system because we are so united in standing up not just for Ukraine, but for the principles of democracy that matter so much.
The Bank of Canada is raising its key interest rate by 0.25 to 0.5% to battle high inflation and rising inflation expectations. Inflation is running at a 30-year high, and the central bank notes it's concerned Canadians may be starting to believe that they will stay higher for longer. It has been more than 3 years since Canada's central bank raised interest rates. So what does that mean exactly for Canadians? Well, BCN's Naveen Day finds out.
Recent data from the Angus Reid Institute found that over half of Canadians reported being unable to keep up with the cost of living. And following the Bank of Canada's announcement that it will raise its policy rate to 0.5%, that means less money is going towards the principal on Canadians' mortgages and other debts. Financial educator with the Credit Counseling Society, Mark Kalinowski, says the hike has been a long time coming.
Interest rates have been historically low. People have been paying rates below 2% on mortgages for more than a year now. I think everyone has seen this coming, especially at the end of the pandemic. We've heard about supply shortages, the cost of living going up. It was only a question of time till they started raising interest rates to try and control that inflation. And here it is. And while people have had time to sort of let this sink in and take action towards it, they've been slow to.
And for those looking to buy or sell a home, Courtney Atkinson with the Atkinson team at eXp Realty says the interest rate hike is not likely to cool off the southern Alberta market.
The key takeaway that we have to remember is that in southern Alberta, this has been a fairly insulated market from a lot of the crazy things that have been happening across Canada and the US. The interest rate changes are going to be rolled out across the entire country, and they're meant to cool off big markets like Toronto, Vancouver, to a lesser extent Calgary, Montreal. For places like us, it's not going to really slow down our market dramatically. It's just going to kind of help us continue to stretch it out and to help it be a really good place to buy and sell.
Adding fuel to the case for higher interest, the Bank of Canada said in a statement, the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russia is a major new source of uncertainty. The next scheduled date for announcing the overnight rate target is April 13th. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Thank you, Naveen. The lawyer for a key organizer of the Ottawa convoy says the judge that ordered Tamara Leach to be held in custody should have recused herself from the case. Leach is seeking bail again, noting Ontario Court Justice Julie Bourgeois was a Liberal candidate in the 2011 federal election. The Medicine Hat woman was charged with counseling a mischief the day before police moved in to break up the protest using powers invoked under the Federal Emergencies Act. A judge has denied bail for one of 4 people charged with conspiracy to commit murder following arrests at last month's border blockade at Acute, protesting pandemic restrictions. Christopher Lysak, who is 48, appeared by video today from the Lethbridge Correctional Center to hear Justice Von Hartigan deliver his decision. Lysak was also charged February 14th with uttering threats, possession of a weapon, and mischief to property over $5,000. 13 people were charged after RCMP found a cache of long guns, handguns, body armor, large amounts of ammunition, and high-capacity magazines in 3 trailers. A bail hearing for his co-accused Jerry Morin was scheduled this afternoon. The group that represents Alberta's 69 counties and municipal districts will vote on a motion to keep the RCMP as their police force. The Rural Municipalities of Alberta motion calls for asking Premier Jason Kenney's government not to create an Alberta Provincial Police Service. Delegates are to vote on the question at the association's convention in Edmonton later this month. Premier Jason Kenney says he has intentions to impose a bylaw blocker where municipalities like the City of Edmonton would not be able to override a provincial order, such as dropping mask mandates. According to our legislative reporter and correspondent with the National Post, the Premier is doing this to prevent confusion across the province.
Now, Kenney says that this is sort of necessary to prevent confusion and division across the province. But I should note that it's actually totally different from what he was saying back in July 2020. And this, of course, was when people were arguing that there should be a mask mandate across the province. And Kenney at the time said, look, Alberta is a big, diverse place. It's completely different in Edmonton or Lethbridge than it is from, Brooks or some other small town in Alberta. So a bit of a change of tune there. The mayors of Edmonton and Calgary, of course, not happy about this, saying that this is, an infringement on the powers of the cities.
We'll hear more from Tyler Dawson following business news. Lethbridge's Chinook Regional Hospital will be the home of some new intensive care beds. Alberta's health minister says the government will spend $300 million over the next 3 years to add more ICU beds in hospitals. Jason Copping says $100 million of that will be spent this year to create 50 permanent ICU beds across the province, including right here in Lethbridge. Copping says the COVID-19 crisis, which overwhelmed existing intensive care units, highlighted the need to add more beds quickly.
That Lethbridge will be the focus for any new ICU beds here in the South Zone. Overall, our goal is to ensure maximum flexibility so the system can surge when and where it is needed. And resources can be redeployed to support other parts of the health system when ICU is not facing pressures. We expect these new beds to come online soon in the coming months.
Imagine seeing a car accident, but when you stop to make sure everyone's okay, your vehicle gets stolen. Well, that's exactly what happened to one Good Samaritan Wednesday morning around 8:30 a.m. when he witnessed a pickup truck going into the ditch at a high rate of speed along Highway 1A outside of Brooks. So he stopped to check on the occupants, but was then assaulted by them and had his own truck stolen. A 29-year-old Brooks woman has been arrested. Brooks RCMP are continuing to search for a 30-year-old man who is a suspect in this incident. The suspect is described as light complexion, dark brown hair, 5'8" tall, and 181 pounds. Agriculture exhibitors from around the world have gathered in Lethbridge to showcase their top products to improve ag production. The Ag Expo and North American Seed Fair kicked off Wednesday at Exhibition Park. There are over 200 exhibitors this year. Lethbridge and District Exhibition CEO Mike Workington says agriculture is the lifeline of Southern Alberta, and Ag Expo provides the opportunity for the industry to come together.
And for us, not only is it a reopening, but it's also a relaunching of how we're going to program events into the future, focused on key aspects of the agricultural industry, focused on key trade corridors with other ag markets in Western Canada, and focused on key import and export routes into the United States and overseas. Ag Expo really does set that stage, and for us to focus on the key commodity groups that happen here in Southern Alberta with the abundance of natural elements that we have here, it really creates the perfect canvas for an agricultural event here in Southern Alberta.
The event will run until March 4th at Exhibition Park in Lethbridge. Well, it could soon be the first of its kind in Canada, a treatment option for acute kidney injury. A study out of the University of Calgary nephrology researchers are coming up to the final stages of creating that treatment, as there are currently no options for patients suffering with acute kidney injury. A nephrologist with Alberta Health Services explains the study.
We've been studying for many years how inflammation occurs in the kidney. And we identified this molecule called dipeptidase 1 that regulates inflammation in the kidney. So that's what we did, is we identified how inflammation occurs in the kidney. And importantly, we found, not that we found, but we've been working on 2 drugs to block that inflammation pathway. We're going to try these drugs in humans in the coming year in some clinical trials, and that's really the exciting part of this story.
If the trial is a success and the medication is created, it would be given through intravenous, and human trials will begin within the next 12 months. Students at the Lethbridge Collegiate Institute Arts Academy of Dance are making a comeback this year with a new show set to be performed next week at the Yates Memorial Theater. As Angela Stewart explains, the students are excited to perform live once again after COVID-19 forced last year's performance to be virtual.
After months and months of rehearsals, these students are ready to lace up their dance shoes, hit the stage, and perform their new show, Awakening.
We've all been working so hard. We've been going after school. We've been practicing during lunch breaks. We just really want to make this show the best for coming back.
The title, Awakening, marks the return of live theater for the students since the pandemic, and the dancers say they can't wait to showcase their pieces.
It's going to be amazing. We brought in amazing choreographers, which have made so unique, cool dances, and we are really excited to show everyone.
Taylor Wickers, a grade 12 student and a member of the Academy since she was in grade 9, says the upcoming show has a lot of meaning to her.
It's very sentimental to me. It's my almost going away show. I'm very thankful that I can do it in person, and I've been able to see how it was online with COVID, and the differences in the years have been just so drastic, and our productions and our shows have just grown.
Jordan Olson, artistic director for the Academy dance program, says they were able to work with some of the best dance choreographers again this year.
All of our choreographers had to be through Zoom. So we learned choreography, but the choreographer would be in Toronto in their apartment and we'd be in the dance studio. So this year we took those same choreographers and we flew them in from wherever they taught us last year, and we got to work with them live and in person, and it's just been such an incredible experience.
Awakening will be jam-packed with tons of dance styles on March 13th and 14th. Tickets can be purchased through the NMAX Ticket Center or by calling the Yates box office. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
That looks like a great show. Well, March Madness is upon us, and that means playoff basketball is in the air. Here locally, the University of Lethbridge Pronghorns basketball teams are preparing for postseason action this weekend. Nathan Ryder went to the university to catch up with the men's and women's teams.
The month of March is normally a time where people think of the NCAA's March Madness basketball tournament, but the University of Lethbridge Pronghorns have their attention firmly set on the Canada West Basketball Championships this coming weekend. The men's and women's team both earned byes into the second round of the tournament. The women's team finished with the 5th seed and will play on Friday against either the University of Manitoba Bison or the University of British Columbia Thunderbirds. Women's basketball head coach Dave Wachnuck says the team's versatility will challenge a lot of opponents.
That we have that versatility to play some different styles. I feel like we match up well with a lot of teams. So I like our advantages going into games, and really it's one game at a time. You can't look too far ahead.
The women's Pronghorns are also a very experienced group. Fourth-year guard Jessica Henney says that playoff basketball is a lot different than the regular season, but the team's experience is a great asset.
And a lot of older players, and me personally, I've been in a couple different playoffs, so I think that'll help for sure, having that playoff experience. It is a lot different than regular league play.
The men's team will be at home at the First Choice Saving Center. The men finished with the 7th seed and will take on the winner of Thursday night's game between UBC Okanagan and the University of Manitoba. Men's basketball head coach Jermaine Small says the team has had a Game 7 mentality all year.
A Game 7 mentality. So every game, I wanted them to feel like every game's a playoff game. I think there'll be a little bit of nerves just because, for guys that have been here before, like Chad and Jeff, and, I think there might be a little bit of nerves, and maybe our new guys will have nerves, but I've told them all year, we got to play like it's our last game, and I think that will translate into Friday night.
For some graduating players, this weekend will be the final games of their college basketball careers. Forward Chad Oviatt says he is looking forward to leaving everything on the court.
Yeah, being at the end of my career, it's a little bit more special, a little bit more anxious about it. I need to get things done this time around, and so I'm just going to give it my all. And
For Bridge City News, I'm Nathan Ryder.
Thank you, Nathan. We've had a real downturn in our weather, suddenly going from +teen temperatures down to the minuses and now snow. I'll tell you how the rest of the week and this coming weekend will be shaping up right after the break. Keep it right here. Well, we are about to get hit with old man winter big time this evening, as we are expecting some snow flurries, some fog patches, a little bit of everything, some wind there. About 5 centimeters of snow should be falling overnight. Into Thursday, we could also see another 5 centimeters of the white stuff. -4 the high for Thursday, -6 on Friday. A little bit colder, but not as much snow. That's going to be mainly cloudy skies on Friday. Into Saturday, we're looking at a high of -5 with partly cloudy skies. Sunshine on Sunday with a high of 2 degrees, 5 degrees the high on Monday with a mix of sun and cloud, and then back to 1 degree to round out our 7-day forecast with a mix of sun and cloud. So we're just a little bit all over the place, nowhere near that average high for this time of year, 4 degrees. -9 the average low. 17 was our high temperature. That's where we were at back in 1994, and back in 1960 we were sitting at -35. 7:14 is when the sun rose this morning. Our sun set this evening at 6:13 p.m., giving us around 11 hours of daylight. I will certainly take that. We are looking at a possibility of some showers on the west coast tomorrow. Vancouver expecting some showers, high of 10 degrees, 11 degrees the high in Victoria tomorrow. Edmonton looking at 60% chance of flurries, -8 the high, and in Calgary, -6 the high. They're looking at 2 to 4 centimeters of snow, as well as some fog patches. As we look to the rest of the prairies, -11 the high in Saskatoon with a mix of sun and cloud. Chance of snow, periods of snow actually in Regina, -9 the high there. -14 expected to be the high in Winnipeg tomorrow, with mainly sunny skies and about 15 to 20 km/h winds there. As we look to Toronto, mainly sunny skies, -3 the high there. Ottawa, high of -10, partly cloudy skies. And in Montreal, looking at a high of -8 as well. As we look to the East Coast over in Atlantic Canada, we're seeing a lot more precipitation there. Seeing periods of snow in Fredericton tomorrow, -3 the high. Halifax going to see a lot of snow, about 10 centimeters of the white stuff. -4 the high there. -6 in Charlottetown tomorrow, expecting flurries there as well. And +1 in St. John's, Newfoundland, with a mix of sun and cloud, expecting 30 to 50 km/h winds. So there you have it. That is your forecast. Apple has stopped selling its products in Russia as part of an intensifying corporate crackdown spurred by the country's invasion of Ukraine. Chinese brands could fill the void, according to an analyst.
As the crisis with Ukraine continues to grow, we've now seen Apple join a number of big Western companies like Google, Nike and others in deciding to stop selling their products in Russia, which is a big move for them, given the fact that it's a major statement from arguably the biggest consumer electronics player on the planet. However, they are also in the very fortunate position that, given their scale, Russia is a relatively small part of their overall income. For some other companies that are exposed to the Russian market, pulling out of that particular territory is a major, major decision. The interesting thing now is going to be whether we see the Chinese manufacturers filling the void left by Apple and other consumer electronics brands. We don't know how that's going to work yet and what China's attitude to sanctions will be, but I would highly suspect that we will see some of the Chinese brands ramping up their volumes in the Russian market.
Housing experts say prospective homebuyers hoping Wednesday's interest rate hike will cool the country's heated real estate market will likely be disappointed. They believe pent-up demand for homes is so high and supply still so scarce that the Bank of Canada's decision to hike the rate to 0.5% won't take much of an edge off of the real estate market. As competition in the Canadian travel market heats up, WestJet Airlines announces a deal to buy Sunwing Airlines Incorporated. Financial terms of the deal, which will see Sunwing's current shareholders become equity holders in the WestJet Group, were not disclosed. Under the agreement, a new tour operating business unit will be created under the WestJet Group to include both Sunwing Vacations and WestJet Vacations Incorporated, and will be led by Sunwing CEO Stephen Hunter. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 251 points to 21,255. The Dow was up 596 points to 33,891. The S&P 500 was up 80 points to 4386, and the Nasdaq was up 219 points to 13,752. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 7.95 to 111.36 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 22 cents to 4.79 US. Gold was down 2 cents to 1928.70 US an ounce, and silver was even at 25.29 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at 12.93 per bushel. Barley is at 9.69. Canola, 24.27, and corn is at 11.56 per bushel. Live cattle were down 43 cents to 140.10. Feeder cattle were up 2.03 to 158.30. Lean hogs were up 10 cents to 106.30. And the Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 79.17 US.
Recapping one of our top stories today, 1 week into Russia's invasion, the United Nations estimates that more than 500,000 people have already fled Ukraine. Thousands of Ukrainian refugees have arrived at Ukraine's border with Poland and Romania. Pope Francis has publicly thanked Poland for its role in helping refugees from the war in Ukraine, praising the country's people for opening their borders, hearts, and doors. The Pope declaring this Ash Wednesday as a day of fasting and prayer for the peace in Ukraine as the war with Russia rages on. Well, this week, Jason Kenney marked the end of almost all remaining COVID-19 restrictions, including capacity restrictions for venues and social gatherings, and also indoor masking. Here to discuss this, as well as provincial funding announcements and a provincial cabinet shuffle, possibly, is our legislative reporter and correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, thanks so much for joining us once again this morning.
Oh, always a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, Tyler, Jason Kenney let go of many restrictions, yet some remain, like wearing masks on public transit.
Yeah, the vast majority of things are gone at this point, and people will know from a few weeks ago when the vaccine passport disappeared. But Tuesday was the sort of end of the masking restriction is really the big one here. And of course, there's the odd exception. You still need to wear one on public transit, healthcare facilities, continuing care. You know, that stuff all seems sort of obvious. And the outlier actually is Edmonton, that has a masking bylaw still, because so lots of other places had masking bylaws sort of back in the summer. And Edmonton did, Calgary did, I think Banff and Canmore did as well. And most of those have dropped. Edmonton's actually hasn't. So it's a little bit of a strange situation in Edmonton here right now, while the rest of the province has moved on from this. But Kenney basically saying that, look, we need to move past fear and we're social creatures and all that sort of thing. So, you know, time will tell, I guess, a little bit whether or not there will be another wave or anything of that nature. But certainly the government is bulldozing ahead on reopening, and the idea that the pandemic is going to become more endemic and we'll treat it as we do sort of other diseases and illnesses.
It definitely appears that way. So you had mentioned, of course, Edmonton maintaining their mask bylaw, and now Kenney may try to block this with a bylaw blocker of some sort. What can you tell us about this?
Right. So about a month ago, Kenney had said during a Facebook Live speech that the government was considering some sort of legislation that would prevent municipalities from coming up with their own sort of COVID regulations. And that's what he announced on Tuesday, that there's going to be modifications to the Municipal Government Act. This is the provincial piece of legislation that basically gives cities their power. Cities are very much the creation of the provinces and the creatures of the provinces. So this will need to happen via legislation. They'll need to introduce a bill that would modify some section of that act to say that municipalities would need to be consistent in their public health regulations, bylaws with the provincial direction. Now, Kenney says that this is sort of necessary to prevent confusion and division across the province. But I should note that it's actually totally different from what he was saying back in July 2020. And this, of course, was when people were arguing that there should be a mask mandate across the province. And Kenney at the time said, look, Alberta's a big, diverse place. It's completely different in Edmonton or Lethbridge than it is from, you know, Brooks or some other small town in Alberta. So a bit of a change of tune there. The mayors of Edmonton and Calgary, of course, not happy about this, saying that this is, an infringement on the powers of the cities. So it's sort of a strange situation, and it actually all might be sort of moot anyways. Alberta will need to go through the political legislative process to make this change happen. And Edmonton's meeting next week on Tuesday or Wednesday to discuss whether or not the mask bylaw should remain. So, that mask bylaw might be gone by the time these things ever happen. So bit of an odd situation, certainly setting up a little bit of a confrontation with some of the big cities in the province.
Yeah, definitely. Now, another surprising turn. I guess Alberta is forecasting a surplus in the 2022 budget. It will be about $500 million, Tyler?
That's right. And this is a huge change. People might remember from about a year ago when the deficit, I can't even remember what it was, but it was some massive number the deficit was projected to be. So, and a lot has happened over the past year and frankly over the last couple months. And it has basically been this. Incomes are doing all right in Alberta, which means income tax revenue is a little bit higher. Energy revenue is way up because, of course, oil prices are way up. Previous budgets had sort of had it around $60 or $70 a barrel. We're now looking at close to $100 a barrel. Obviously, that brings tons and tons more money into the provincial treasury. And the UCP would also say actually that they've showed a lot of spending restraint, and that's how this has allowed us to get back to surplus. Just as a sort of a mental experiment, if the UCP had continued on the same sort of spending path that the New Democrats had, we would have about a $4 billion deficit right now, as opposed to a $500 million surplus. So about a $4.5 billion difference is what that would amount to, which is actually like a very small proportion of the overall budget, but just goes to show that there is a little bit of spending restraint playing a role there as well. And of course, who knows what will happen? The estimates are conservative in some ways, banking on lower oil prices. Like, they're not saying that it's going to be $100 a barrel in their estimates. They're saying it's going to be lower than that. So still a little bit of fluctuation possible here. But, politically for the UCP, this is very, very good news. Anyone around Kenny that you talk to will say that the way that this party wins the 2023 election is by having a booming economy. And certainly this is a sign that we are on that track.
Mm-hmm. Now, Alberta's opposition is calling for Kenny to kick former Justice Minister and Solicitor General Casey Madu out of cabinet. This, of course, goes back to that phone call that he made to the Edmonton police chief after he got a ticket.
Yeah, so the latest development in this is the report into that phone call was released late last week. So if you cast your mind back, the gist of the story is Casey Madu was driving, got pulled over, distracted driving ticket. He was apparently angry and frustrated by this and immediately called up the chief of the police in Edmonton to discuss this ticket and raised concerns that he had been racially profiled, and that this might be similar to the sort of police stalking, I guess, that had been experienced by Shannon Phillips down in Lethbridge. Anyways, so this all came out. Madu was kicked from his role as Justice Minister, and Sonia Savage filled in, and this independent investigator, Adele Kent, a former judge, I believe, was brought in to look into this. The conclusion of this report was that Casey Madu did not interfere with the administration of justice, but had certainly tried to interfere with it. So he has, of course, lost his Justice Minister post. That now goes to Tyler Shandro, who was formerly in Labor, who was formerly in Health, if we cast our minds back. Right. And so now Casey Madu is going to be the Labor Minister. So just a little bit of drama there. Casey Madu, of course, just to make a point of this, is the only member of cabinet from Edmonton, which speaks to some extent his importance in cabinet. But this was a classic Friday night cabinet shuffle, sort of around 5 o'clock sort of thing, when we were all supposed to be making dinner with our families, and they didn't manage to slip it by any of us. It's got quite a bit of attention in the past week.
Do you think he should be removed from office completely for this?
Well, the New Democrats are certainly claiming that he should be removed from office. One of the things that Premier Kenny's statement on it said is that he was not found to have interfered with the administration of justice. But Kenny's statements have sort of they've slipped past this other finding, which is that he tried to interfere. So I do think it is unusual that he remains in cabinet after a finding of that nature. And the NDP, I think, is going to keep hammering away on that. But at the end of the day, of course, the question is whether or not this is the sort of thing, the sort of lapse in judgment, I don't think that would be controversial to say, that will get the attention of voters. And I don't know whether it will or not, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Time will tell, I guess. Now, we've heard that Jason Kenney has asked Alberta Health Services to explore ending the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers in the province. What can you tell us about this?
So this was a fairly controversial announcement last fall that healthcare workers were going to need to get their COVID vaccine. It was sort of added to the list of shots they had to get, along with some of the other inoculations that were already mandatory. And it was quite controversial in some quarters and led in some locations to a number of people who would not have been able to actually go to work, which could have sort of impaired the function of some small town and rural facilities. So the deadline was originally like the end of November. They had to do this, and that was bumped back to December 13th, I think it was. And then it was almost kind of scrapped entirely already because the Omicron wave hit and sort of swamped hospitals and they needed all the staff they could get. The government sort of allowed testing to be done instead of having this vaccination requirement. So to some extent, the mandate sort of already has died a little bit, I think would be fair to say. But Kenney is asking AHS to sort of officially explore ways to repeal that. And the province might instead, should there be other waves or other concerns about transmission, they would maybe just test all workers and the government would pay for that. So there's some sort of options to be explored there. Not totally clear on a timeline or when that's going to happen or whatever, but that is sort of the, a bit of the backstory on the vaccination mandate.
Okay, thank you. Of course, major news this week, the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. As that continues, it seems that many are banning Russian products and services, including the Alberta Gaming and Liquor Commission. It looks like they've banned new stock of Russian liquor.
Right. So this has actually kind of happened all over the country. There have been Manitoba, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Ontario, I believe, have all sort of pulled Russian products from their shelves. And the AGLC, which regulates gaming, liquor, and cannabis in Alberta, is sort of doing the same, banning sort of the restocking of these products, I believe. And there's actually not very many of them, judging from other jurisdictions. You had, I think, maybe Russian Prince vodka was the big one, and then a couple other provinces said they had a beer or two from Russia. So, very much a symbolic move, I think is fair to say. But it is part of this much larger sort of movement of boycotts and sanctions and things like that are being done, sort of at the personal level in decision making by regular Canadians, and also at the government level, the federal government level in particular, which has really leveled a lot of sanctions against Russian individuals and banned flights in Canadian airspace and things like that.
Yeah, and of course, likewise, AIMCO, Alberta's pension management firm, right? So they'll divest from Russia-related investments?
Yeah, and they've got about $158 million worth of sort of direct and indirect exposures is sort of the term that's used to Russian investments, which again is like it's very, very little money. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's only about 0.1%, I think, of AIMCO's overall investments. But yeah, they're going to be looking at that. So it's a similar sort of thing, arguably symbolic, but certainly part of this much larger trend that we're seeing right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, Tyler, there have been piles of funding announcements around the province. Perhaps would this be leading up to Kenney's leadership review next month? Do you think this could be laying the groundwork for that, or for next year's election, for that matter?
Yeah, that's the thing. There's so much political stuff going on at the moment that it's very hard to sort of separate these funding announcements from the sort of political machinations that are ongoing. We are about a year from an election. In theory, I mean, Jason Kenney could call an election tomorrow if he so desired. I have no indication that's happening, but our scheduled election is for next year. And there is the leadership review coming up in early April. So there is a little bit of a fire hose of spending happening right now, with a new hospital expansion in Red Deer, or renovation, I believe, a childcare center, the Red Deer Regional Airport getting some upgrades. And that's all just sort of around Red Deer, which is actually where the leadership vote is going to be held. And of course, this is also a symbol a little bit of a better than expected, better than forecast provincial budget. And now there's a little bit of money to play with. But I bring that up at this point just because, over the next year, I think we are going to see a lot of that sort of funding. We are going to see the UCP spending to try and shore up its reputation, I guess, in some of these jurisdictions where perhaps they see a fight with the NDP. They want goodwill all around when people go to the ballot box next year. So it's just worth sort of keeping an eye on some of these spending announcements in the months to come.
Yeah, it should be interesting. It looks like we are getting close to running out of time, but any last thoughts from Edmonton, from the legislature?
Well, the other thing that we didn't mention that I should just point out is, and I think I've talked about it with Hal previously, is that there is this by-election going on in Fort McMurray. Brian Jean is running for the UCP, very vocal opponent of Jason Kenney, and Paul Hinman, who's the leader of the Wild Rose Independence Party, is running there. Now, my forecast would be that Brian Jean will take that race fairly handily, but it will be very interesting to see how Paul Hinman does. There's been a lot of talk over the last 3-4 years about separatism and independence in Alberta, and this is, really one of the big test cases, I guess we could say, for that movement. So, in the weeks to come, that's certainly worth keeping an eye on as well.
Tyler Dawson, thanks so much for joining us here. That is legislative reporter and correspondent with the National Post at Tyler Dawson.
We often read headlines that say abortion is a settled issue here in Canada, but is it really? There's still a large number of Canadians who are opposed to the termination of a tiny unborn being with a heartbeat. Is there any realistic hope of changing the majority's view on the issue? Today's guests believe there is. Alyssa Galobe is one of the co-founders of Right Now, a Canadian pro-life organization, and she joins us now from Calgary. Alyssa, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
So Alyssa, what is your organization all about, and how do you differ from other pro-life groups?
Well, our organization is solely focused on nominating and electing pro-life candidates. And this is very different from other pro-life organizations because for the past few decades, groups have basically focused on street activism, the Life Chain holding signs up on the road, or the March for Life doing rallies on Parliament Hill. But there have been very few organizations that have focused on the electoral process. Other organizations focus on lobbying politicians after they're already elected. But what in our research with myself and my co-founder, Scott Hayward, of our organization is that we can make the most amount of difference, especially in the nomination process. And so we started this organization to focus solely on that area.
So what kind of success have you had so far in nominating pro-life politicians?
We've had a lot of success. We started in 2016, and one of our first politicians that we helped in the nomination process was 19-year-old Sam Osterhoff in Ontario, who was an ardent social conservative who went up against the president of the party. And no one knew who he was. Very few people paid attention to him. Everyone thought it was going to be a landslide victory of the president of the party, but he ended up winning because social conservatives and pro-life voters got involved. They bought their nominations and they showed up and supported Sam. So we often use that as an example just of how powerful the pro-life vote can be in the nomination process.
Now, political parties are obviously very aware of what you're doing right now and who you are. What kind of tactics are they using to maybe try and stop your message and really stop you in your tracks here?
Well, it all depends on who the leader is, because if we do have a sympathetic leader or even one who's pro-life that we've seen in the past, they very much respect democracy. They respect open nomination process. We've also had terrible leaders provincially where they disqualify candidates the night before if they don't like what they're saying and for no reason at all. So it's been kind of a whirlwind in terms of who we elect and how successful we are in terms of the leader. But, in the last two federal elections, which is the two that we've been around for in our existence, we've actually been able to increase the number of pro-life politicians both in 2019 and 2021. So the Conservative Federal Party is far more pro-life now than it was 5 years ago, and we only expect to continue that success.
Now, in your recent research, Alyssa, what percentage of the population do you think is actually against abortion? And how many of these people would potentially consider getting involved politically?
Yeah, so recent polls, the last major poll was done by Angus Reid in 2020, and it showed that 34% of Canadians thought life began at conception. And so in a country of 38 million people, that's about 12 million Canadians who are pro-life. In terms of where they fall on the pro-life spectrum, the same poll also showed that the majority of Canadians want restrictions on abortion in every single province, including Atlantic Canada and Quebec, which are seen as more of the kind of progressive provinces. So this is a unanimous thing that Canadians do want, and the legislature, especially federally, has to keep up with the public opinion on this issue.
So what kind of legislation would you like to see changed? Many political parties, including the Conservative Party of Canada, has already said it's a non-starter and abortion will remain.
Yeah, so I think, again, that public policy has to reflect public opinion. And so if the majority of Canadians want restrictions on abortion, and the Supreme Court in our versus Morgentaler said it was up to the federal legislature to implement these laws, then it's our duty as Canadians, as voters, to elect politicians that will reflect that policy and will pass legislation. And that's really what the goal of the game that we play is that to elect those politicians that do reflect that public policy. And so even in the Conservative Party, some leaders have said, we won't reopen the debate, but every single time there's a leader that says that, there have been multiple backbench MPs which have put forward different types of legislation. And we see the support for that legislation growing and growing each year.
So in your opinion, what are the odds of seeing a pro-life federal Conservative leader being elected? Any word yet on any pro-life candidates, such as maybe Leslyn Lewis, who's an outspoken social conservative running?
Yeah, I'm absolutely confident that a pro-life leader will run, and I'm very hopeful that it will be Leslyn Lewis. She hasn't announced yet, but the signs are there. And if that's the case, then to me, it's really a make or break time in the Conservative Party, because they can continue to elect kind of the establishment candidate that's been around for decades, that has the same talking points and the same message and the same sole focus on economic issues and not touch anything cultural. Or we can go in a new direction with a new leader, a fresh perspective, no hidden agenda, someone who can actually win in the GTA and different suburban parts of Canada, and who also has that conservative policy that I think so many Canadians are in search of.
Now, for any viewers, Alyssa, who might be watching this program right now and thinking about getting involved politically in some fashion, what would you say to them? Like, which areas do you need help in specifically?
Well, like I said, this leadership race is very important. So even if we put together lists of personal pro-life contacts that we know, and reach out to them during the leadership race and ask them to buy a membership to support the pro-life leadership candidate, that can exponentially increase the number of votes, and that's the number of points that a pro-life leader needs to win. And just also to join our organization so we can let you know when there's a pro-life candidate in your riding, so you can vote in that nomination, and we can elect more and more pro-life politicians across the country.
It's interesting to see polling revealing that a majority of Canadians are in fact opposed to gender-selective abortions and late-term abortions. Now, why is it that legislation to this effect never actually gets past first base?
I think it's mostly because the pro-life movement hasn't focused in this area of electing pro-life candidates as much as we've needed to. So even though our numbers keep increasing in Parliament, we still don't have enough to pass pro-life legislation, which is ultimately the goal. The goal is to elect 170 pro-life MPs, which is 51%, so we can pass these types of pro-life bills, especially bills that reflect public policy. So I think that in many of these situations, even though support for these bills has increased over the last few years, it's not enough to pass in the House, and that's what we're fighting for.
Now, there are many who believe that opposition to abortion is simply coming from the Christian fundamentalists. Is this true, or are there other groups championing the pro-life cause?
I mean, the majority of New Canadians hold social conservative values, and each party recognizes that this is a large voter base that parties need to win, especially in the GTA. And often people think, GTA, Toronto, they think progressive, you have to be as red as possible, as liberal as possible. But the truth is we're not talking about downtown Toronto. We're talking about all the different communities. I lived in Toronto for 10 years. I know all the different communities, all the thousands of churches that are in that area. And those are the people that we can really target, who hold these views, and intensify them so that it crosses over to who they vote for politically. So I think that this is an easy and low-hanging fruit of a population to actually get them to vote for our issues, because they're issues that are dear to their heart. And so I think that that's really what we're going to focus on in the future.
So it's more the 905, not the 416 that we're talking about. It could be maybe the Durham region, it could be out, Port Perry somewhere, or maybe Binbrook out by Hamilton, that area. So not so much Toronto Centre, like right in the middle there.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, those downtown Toronto ridings only are, a few ridings in 338. So the majority of them are kind of outside the downtown core, and those are really where new Canadians tend to go. Even in Vancouver, which we had a lot of success in the 2019 federal election, we won the majority of those swing ridings there, and we elected pro-life candidates. So in these different areas, we have had success, and we will continue to do so because those are where a lot of pro-lifers live.
Now, I understand that you see abortion as more of a human rights issue. Can you explain?
Well, like I said, because there are so many different people with so many different backgrounds and religious denominations, abortion is a human rights issue. It's not necessarily a religious issue, even though many religious people hold this view. But in our organization, we have dealt with and have so many different supporters from all walks of life. And the fact is that you don't need to be religious to understand that scientifically abortion kills a human being, and that you want that to stop in Canada. And that's really the message that we focus on, and we deal with how we can do that politically in our country.
So let's say the Conservative Party of Canada elects its new leader, maybe Jean Charest, it could be Pierre Poilievre, or maybe Leslyn Lewis. But let's say the new leader happens to be pro-choice. How are you going to work with that leader to help further your cause?
I think the same way we have done with the last leader, in that we've just focused on nominating in the nomination process. Many of these leaders, although they hold the pro-choice or pro-abortion perspective, do respect the democratic process of the nominations. And so we're able to intensify people in different ridings that we're focused on and get them involved and vote and win in those nominations. So even with a ardently pro-abortion leader like Erin O'Toole, we were able to increase the number of pro-life politicians in the last election. And if that happens in the future, we'll continue to focus on that area.
So any advice on how to better identify pro-life voters and to gather them together cohesively to influence our nation?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways. Social media is a huge help. We also have door knocking campaigns where we ask people to sign a pro-life petition, so we can sort of gauge where they're at in the neighborhoods that we need. Going into different churches, church presentations where people are generally pro-life but don't understand how that translates politically. We also do presentations just to communities and different ridings that we're focused on. So there's lots of different ways that people can help educate the community that they're in and intensify people's vote so that they can nominate and elect a pro-life candidate in the future if they haven't already.
So, Alyssa, I want to ask you specifically and personally, how did you get involved and why do you have a passion for being a pro-lifer?
Well, I really started getting involved in my teen years when I saw a picture of abortion victim photography, and that kind of stuck with me. And then throughout university, I was pro-life and I was involved in different campaigns. And then right out of university, I decided to work full-time in the pro-life movement, not really understanding how vast it is in all the different areas. And so the very first place that I started out was a crisis pregnancy center, volunteering every day. And so we would deal with abortion-minded women who were set on having abortions but might have changed their mind at the last minute or realized that there were other choices or other options for them that we provided. And that really intensified my pro-life stance. And it's one of the driving reasons behind why I do what I do politically today.
So what do you say to somebody who says to you, look, this is my body, my choice? How do you approach that conversation?
Well, a lot of people who say that, when they find out, when you ask them why they made that choice, the number one thing that they say is, I thought I had no other choice. So I think providing people with other options and having more informed consent is a big part of that, because I'm all for my body, my choice, but if abortion was solely about a woman's body, she'd be aborting herself. But she's not. She's aborting a separate individual human being with separate DNA. But I think the real kind of way to explain that is to show that there are other choices. And when women are faced with real choices that actually help them, then they vastly don't go with abortion.
Alyssa Golob is one of the co-founders of Right Now, a Canadian pro-life organization. Thanks so much for joining us today from Calgary.
Thanks for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.